Well, hello, this is Pastor Russ, and it's time now for our mini Bible study, one that we can do in 10 minutes or less. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 30, which I call Jacob's family increases. This is part one of chapter 30. We're going to look at part two next week. I'm just really glad to have you with me here today. This is Pastor Russ, and I'm just going to have time to look at the first part and talk about it. If you remember what's happened so far in Genesis, is that Abraham's son Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob, and Jacob received the promise, the blessing from his father, and then his mother Rachel said to Jacob, "You need to go and find yourself a wife. Go back to my homeland and look up my brother Laban." So this is the uncle of Jacob. And from that homeland there, find yourself a wife from among my own people. So he goes back, and we read in chapter 29 that he fell in love with Rachel. It worked 7 years to get Rachel, but when he came to his wedding, instead he was given the older sister, Leah. And then he had to, in order to have Rachel and Leah, had to work an additional 7 years, 14 years total, for Laban. And so he did that. And so now he's working with them, and now they're starting to have children. Leah has had two children already by Jacob, but Rachel's womb has been closed up. And so we're starting now with chapter 30 with verse 1. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" Then she said, "Here is Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea. He has given me a son." And because of this, she named him Dan. And I've got notes here that says Dan means he has vindicated. So she feels, now I'm vindicated by God. My womb has been opened up. And we'll continue on now with verse 7. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." So she named him Naphtali, and Naphtali means my struggle. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her maidservant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune!" So she named him Gad, which means good fortune. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "How happy I am! The women will call me happy." So she named him Asher, which of course means happy. During the wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, "God has rewarded me by giving my maidservant to my husband." So she named him Issachar, and Issachar means reward. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him six sons." So she named him Zebulun, and Zebulun means honor. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph, and said, may the Lord add to me another son. And that name Joseph means may he add. And we're going to end here at verse 24. We'll do verse 25 through 43, the end of the chapter, next week. But I want to talk a little bit about a couple things that's going on here that I think is really, really important. One of the things that's really important would be the sons of Jacob. If you remember in verse or not verse, but chapter 29, we had two sons that were born. Reuben, which means he has seen my misery. This was born from Leah. Leah feels like because she's the unloved one, she's not the favorite of Jacob, that she has to prove herself. She loves Jacob, but Jacob doesn't love her in the same way. Her second son, then, that Leah bears him is Simeon, which means one who hears. If you heard in this chapter, many times it said God was listening to Leah or listening to Rachel. And what that means is that God answered their plea to have a son. Part of the honor that they received as women in that time in the Bible was by having children and specifically having sons. The more sons you have, then the more wealth that you have, more honor you have, more respect that you have as a female. And so the first thing is that she's married. They're married to Jacob, who is a good person. Secondly, they have children. And thirdly, most of those children happen to be sons. And so we have here Reuben and Simeon. Then we have Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, and Joseph. And that's not all. Of course, the youngest son is Benjamin, and they end up having 12 sons of Jacob. And this is very important because these become the 12 tribes of Israel, which are going to be very important in the latter part of Genesis and throughout the Hebrew history as far as the dividing up of the land amongst the 12 different tribes. This is also going to be very important for the end times as well. So besides the sons of Jacob, another thing that's important to look at here is the rivalry between Leah and Rachel. Again, we have a common theme here of one of the women, in this case it's Rachel, and later on it becomes Leah, that their womb becomes barren and they're not able to have children. And so it was a custom back then that you could give your maidservant, Bilhah and Zilpah were given to Jacob as a wife, as a surrogate wife, and they had children, they had sons, but those sons counted toward Leah and counted toward Rachel. And so that was an odd custom. First of all, to have multiple wives, and secondly, to be able to give your maidservant to have children. But this rivalry between siblings is important. We saw that in Jacob and Esau. We saw that at the very beginning in Genesis between Cain and Abel, and we're going to see that continue as we go on here in the brothers, the 12 sons of Jacob, and their jealousy and rivalry with one of the second youngest son, Joseph, and how they don't like what he's doing. So this is another common theme in the Bible. And many times God chooses the younger, God chooses the weakest of what seems like to be the children, the siblings, to actually have the blessing go through them or to be blessed. Well, I'm so glad that you joined with me today. I really hope that you can take a look at my website. I've got lots of wonderful things on there for you to look at. If you want to go to the website, just go to pastorruss.net and you'll see videos that I've got there. You'll see all of the Bible study chapters on Genesis there. So if you want to catch up, if you want to go back and review any, you can do that. So I hope you have a great and a blessed day. And until we meet again, this is Pastor Russ saying, so long.